this week. First up in the enterprise security news, how StealthBits released real-time threat detection and response platform with StealthDEFEND version 2.2. Bitdefender Gravityzone enhanced with a new endpoint defense capability. Tenable to secure enterprise cloud environments with Microsoft Azure Integration. And Aqua Security buys CloudSploit to expand their security posture in the cloud. In our second segment, we welcome Babar Amin, CTO West at Ping Identity, to discuss zero trust architecture and how that ties into identity. In the final segment, Ward Coble, Senior Product Manager at Viave Solutions, will be here to discuss threat detection, the network scavenger hunt. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Networks are becoming increasingly complex and fragmented, and digital transformation and DevOps are driving an explosion in network connectivity changes. With each new network connection, cyber attackers may gain another opening to breach or traverse the network. At TwoFin, they've pioneered a policy-based approach to network security management using automation and analytics. As a result, you can make network changes in minutes instead of days, reliably and securely. To learn more about TwoFin, the security policy company, go to securityweekly.com/TwoFin and sign up for a free evaluation. By the end of 2020, 99% of exploited vulnerabilities will be publicly disclosed and known to IT system admins. The consequences of that fact means the burglar will already be in your house because you left the front door wide open by failing to patch known vulnerabilities. How can you keep the threat actors out? Through cloud-based automation, Automox enables you to slam the door on unpatched OS and third-party vulnerabilities across your entire Windows, Mac, and Linux infrastructure. Take advantage of a free trial with Automox to not only see the vulnerability status of your infrastructure, but do something about it within minutes. Start automating the fundamentals of cyber hygiene at securityweekly.com/Automox. That's securityweekly.com/Automox. Most cloud threats are your responsibility, not your cloud service providers, and prevention-based security isn't enough on its own. That's why Gartner predicts that 60% of enterprise security budgets will go towards detection and response in 2020. ExtraHop RevealX Cloud delivers cloud-native network detection and response for the hybrid enterprise, the only SaaS-based NDR solution for AWS. Request your 30-day free trial of RevealX Cloud at extrahop.com/trial. That's extrahop.com/trial. Welcome to ESW Enterprise Security Weekly number 161, recorded on November 13th, 2019. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. It's going to be a really fun show, as always. A couple of guest segments coming up and enterprise news. But first up, webcasts. We've got 3 that you can register for. The first one is with Alex Cox and Barbara Kay of ServiceNow. The second's with Kevin O'Brien of Great Horn, and the third one is with Steve Laubenstein of Core Security. You can register for all 3 of them if you want, and I highly recommend that. You can go to securityweekly.com, click the webcast drop-down menu, and register for upcoming ones, or check out the on-demand library. And as always, you get ISC squared CPE credits, 1 credit per webcast. So make sure you go do that. Now, the security news. Some good stuff. It was hard to find what I did, Matt, this week to really dig. There was still a lot of Azure announcements, and many of them I skipped over. I stuck the Tenable one in there because it holds a place in our hearts, right? And we both work there, so I figured we'd talk about it.
Yeah, there's still a couple stragglers from Ignite. What was it, last week or the week before? You had the Tenable one. And then there was also one you didn't put in here. Cloud Needy had an update to one of theirs in the Azure store as well. So yeah, definitely still some integrations with Microsoft and the Azure platform. Again, makes sense. People moving to that platform need to validate your configurations, need to validate your vulnerabilities in those environments. So definitely good announcements there.
And it ties into StealthBits as well. I'm not sure how well integrated StealthBits and others in that space are into Azure, I'm sure they have to have some kind of ties into that environment, because like we've established, that's where people are going. Their new StealthDEFEND 2.2 includes detection for some Active Directory attacks that they didn't have before, which I think is important.
Yeah, the question here is, and I couldn't figure it out from the article, is this only supporting on-premise Active Directory, or is it also going to support Azure AD? That's what I couldn't figure out, right? So I don't know, does this extend into the Azure environment, or is it just strictly on-premise?
And I'm sure it has to, right?
You would think so.
They're working on it, right? Because one of the things is they can identify forged, Kerberos, privileged attribute certificates or packs, and detect when the ntds.dit file, which is Active Directory's database, is being tampered with. We've had technical segments talking about some of those different attacks. And I like the StealthBits platform to give you some extra visibility into that, in addition to managing, your identity and files and data as well. Light identity management, I should say. Well, I don't know they're not an identity management player, but they certainly can control who views what and give you some visibility into that.
Yeah, and so that the ntds.dit file is the question, right? Do you have access to that in Azure AD or not, right? Which lends me to believe this still may be just on-prem capabilities, not Azure AD capabilities. But again, I don't know. I can't tell.
Right.
It doesn't get into that detail here in this article.
SAP security. We haven't talked about SAP security in some time. Apsian is like the one other player in SAP security. Maybe there's three. I'm not sure. Onapsis, of course, being one of the other big ones. Apsian seems more like you've got this gigantic, Oracle or PeopleSoft application, and they give you security controls when you pay the millions of dollars to buy the software and implement it and all that stuff. But similar, I think, to Active Directory, you've got to put some other security product in place to help you manage it. It makes security easier, more accessible, and have visibility. Not have to maybe turn as many knobs and dials. And also that kind of layer of security you add on afterwards to make sure that if something's not patched or configured correctly in the background, you've got something else sitting on top of it or in front of it to help protect against those attacks, right? And we see that with Active Directory all the time, right? Various products. I think Stemperis was in the news for something. It was another Azure announcement. They're the Active Directory kind of backup service, right? That's another niche where, there's stuff in Active Directory. You can do it if you're really good with Active Directory, and there's still some shortcomings you'd have to code on your own. So they have a product to fill that niche. Seems like Apsian is similar kind of thing when it relates to SAP applications.
Yeah, SAP made some acquisitions years back in the early days of GRC and Sarbanes-Oxley compliance to add certain security controls within the SAP ecosystem itself, right? And it was primarily to deal with things like least privilege and make sure that people couldn't sign an order, and some separation of duties controls and some other things in there. So there are native security controls built into SAP, where Onapsis and Apsian play are areas that SAP wouldn't do natively themselves within their own software. So there's additional security controls that both of these platforms allow to help secure the rest of the SAP environment. When I was at Qualys, I remembered we were over in Munich, I think, for one of the QSCs, their security conference, and I remember SAP being a German-based company. A lot of the Germans were asking about, were we going to do SAP security checks? And one of the challenges with SAP is each version of the software is like a different architecture, right? So every time there's like an update to SAP, it creates some interesting nuances that other security vendors have to figure out, because it's not like you're going from a dot version to another dot version. Like the whole underlying architecture could change, and it would change the way you'd scan it or apply certain security controls. So SAP's always been tough, which is why you only see a couple vendors in this space.
Well, it's a lot of work for people that don't want to scan it or know about vulnerabilities in it, to be quite honest, right? And that's why you see the major VM players, I mean, a lot of them have light support for it, right?
Right.
But you see, all the players that are focused on that have very deep and wide support for identifying vulnerabilities. And really what they're talking about when I think it was their CEO that says, where is it? Context-specific algorithms to comprehensively measure security risk. So that's like scanning and auditing, and authenticated scanning. It could be remote scanning, right? Or some agent that sits in front of it and looks at requests. And then they say, then deploy adaptive access controls. And this space really, I think, required that, yes, tell me where my security shortcomings are. It's months for us to plan for a patch, like a throwback to the old mainframe days. So give us some measure of security controls in the meantime. And it just became a very niche space.
Yeah, very niche space. Again, that's why you see like 2 players in the space.
And really cool exploits and vulnerabilities that happen in there too. We've had lots of great conversations with the Onapsis folks on that front. Bitdefender Gravityzone. What do you know about Bitdefender? I mean, they do some hypervisor stuff, I know, but they're also big in the consumer endpoint security kind of market. Now, is Gravityzone, I didn't look too deep to see if it was that. It says it's their EDR, new endpoint detection and response, which tells me it's more of an enterprise play than on the consumer side.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the crowded endpoint detection and response market. It's adding some network-based and fileless attack detections, which we've seen other EDR solutions already provide. So obviously, they're adding more enterprise-type features into the space. I'm still interested to see where the space is going to go, right? I mean, we've talked about this, I think, last week. We continue to see this progression of consolidation in the endpoint space with a number of the acquisitions and mergers that have happened over the past year or so. These guys are all trying to figure out how to keep up and make themselves relevant in a quickly consolidating market. So it'll be interesting to see, where these guys are in a year from now.
They claim to be able to block attacks prior to exploit, before the ransomware payloads can be dropped. It's a pretty bold claim.
Pretty bold claim. Remember, Endgame was doing some really interesting stuff.
They have some protections.
Stuff like that as well, right? So again, to me, this is kind of a catch-up feature because I know other EDRs have this capability already. And like I said, you've got some interesting consolidation in the market going on right now. So everybody's trying to figure out kind of their niche and how to continue to survive.
Yeah, and I still think as a community we need to look at just how well they can prevent against exploits and or payloads. I'd say that what I've heard from folks is the majority of the market, if you're changing your exploit and or payload in the slightest way, it's going to slip past defenses, except for like a small handful of endpoint vendors that actually look at the behaviors of that at any kind of level, and not like a specific behavior, but generic enough behavior so that if someone does change the payload or exploit, it still catches it.
Right.
All righty. There was an article about the top application security vendors. Did you see this?
I did. It was interesting. There's a few missing off this list.
It was mostly scanners, which are.
Yeah.
I mean, you still need, if you're DevOps, process in any capacity, your scanner is going to be very different requirements for that environment, put it that way.
Yeah, and when you look at this list, I mean, they kind of vary all over, right? You have Acunetics, but NetSparker's not listed. That's interesting. Anybody who understands the relationship between Acunetics and NetSparker, right? Yep. Sponsors. Then you have Now Secure on the mobile side, which was interesting because that's more of a mobile testing play.
Yeah.
And really the only one in the list. Right, you have Rapid7, the App Spider product, right. The old NT Objectives, but Qualys isn't listed here because those two kind of go side by side.
I mean, Qualys has their own web app scanner, but in speaking with them on the PSW interview we did a couple weeks ago, they're very well in tune with the DevOps process because they do it internally for their own software.
Right. Synopsys has a very broad portfolio, brand new sponsor on ASW. I mean, the work they've got Black Duck, which is doing the software
They made some great
composition
acquisitions.
analysis.
Yep.
Yeah, they've made a number of acquisitions over the year. Synopsys probably has one of the broadest application security portfolios of any vendor out there.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I used to steer people towards HP to get some of that. Like, if you want to go to one vendor, maybe you've got a relationship with HP and you want to look at their AppSec portfolio. But Synopsys is like now right up there. In head-to-head, and it sounds like innovation covering the news. We don't really cover HP's app security as side of their business. We're covering Synopsys.
Well, because HP spun it off to Micro Focus. So Micro Focus owns that whole portfolio, the old Fortify product, and it has gone into La La Land.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't heard, really anything coming out of the Micro Focus side of the house that bought a lot of those security assets. They bought ArcSight, they bought Fortify, etc. Those products have kind of just dropped off our radar screen. We don't see a lot of updates on those products at all. Then you have Veracode, which was part of CA. CA was building an application security portfolio before they were bought by Broadcom.
Right, Broadcom spun that back out and said, we don't want that.
Out. Right. Thoma Bravo bought it, so Veracode's back in the static days, and then White Hat is out there. There's others. I mean,
Veracode has a pretty comprehensive suite too, though, and they've absolutely managed to stay a major player in that space without question. Yeah.
So there's definitely some missing off this list. It's a good starting point, but there's definitely more.
Let's see. Cloud Vector's API threat protection platform secures APIs against data breaches, so they claim.
Yeah, well, so you read the first line and you're like, okay, hold on, time out. The first API threat protection platform to go beyond the gateway. There's others out there. I mean, we've talked to 42 Crunch, we've talked to others that are out there. I mean, there are folks that are building out API security capabilities. Ping, who we're going to talk to in the next segment, has built some API security capabilities. So it's a pretty bold claim. And so I was trying to figure out where they came from. They actually came out of a company called Arisa Bay. So Cloud Vector arises from Arisa Bay, appoints Ravi Katod, the CEO. So it looks like it's a spin out from an existing company focused on API security. A pretty bold claim to say they're the first. I don't think they are, because we've briefed a number of these folks over the past year.
Yeah, I did some briefings with API. Yeah, there's a lot of great API. And I kind of liken it, when I think about the problem, right, and I liken it to vulnerability management, a lot of it is how long you've been around to accumulate enough signatures and detections for like they say, discovering and APIs is one thing, right? Monitoring them to see when they're secure, when they're not. Having that list of what makes an API secure or not is, and how extensive that list is really something to compare in this kind of early time in these API security companies, right? Eventually, you'll reach a point where that, like with VM, doesn't matter as much, right? But now we're in a time where there could be some vast differences between these companies.
Yeah, this is a rapidly evolving space as we see more API to API communication due to microservice architectures, due to integrations of various products. So this is an evolving space, and I think one that definitely needs the attention. But you're also seeing a lot of vendors approach it from different ways on aspects of discovering endpoints, understanding and documenting what those endpoints are supposed to do, then monitoring those API endpoints. So there's a lot of capabilities that are still pretty early, but definitely an area that has to be addressed, because we just see the proliferation of these API calls all over the place.
And there's really two separate areas, right? I've got an enterprise network, or even in my home. If I were to start looking at what is talking over various APIs and responding to various API calls, I think there'd be some pretty interesting research. Now, a lot of larger vendors, especially on the IoT side, have started to lock down some of their APIs, and we've covered some stories on that, right? The other aspect that hits enterprise and application security is the applications that you have, whether you've written them yourselves or taken pieces and parts or gotten someone else's application, right? How those are all talking, I guess it's even two categories, right? Off-the-shelf software and software I've written myself. How are those APIs communicating with each other?
not only with each other, but also to external sources. Think about all the API calls we make on a daily basis for publishing and stuff.
Right. Yeah, and there's how you've implemented the client. There's how they've implemented the server. All kinds of stuff in there. So a cool space to watch for sure. Aqua Security has bought CloudSploit to expand their cloud security posture management, which is interesting.
Yes. This is an interesting acquisition, one I didn't see coming. So let me set the stage first. So Palo Alto makes couple acquisitions in this space, right? Palo Alto buys Evident.io, kind of an okay acquisition, realizes the mistake, and ends up buying CloudLock, really a cloud security posture management company.
Mm-hmm.
Then they go out and they buy TwistLock, a container security company.
Big competitor to Aqua.
A big competitor to Aqua, right? I mean, in the scheme of things, it was TwistLock, Aqua, Layered Insight, pretty much, right? Those were kind of the top three.
Of course, Qualys buys Layered Insight.
Right. Palo Alto buys TwistLock. So you have Aqua left in the mix.
And I would venture to say it's sink or swim for Aqua.
It's a good way to put it.
Really
Somebody might need
punny.
to throw them a life preserver. Oh.
Yeah. But so they decided to step up and make an acquisition. So good for them. I like it.
Right. And so you would expect that at some point Aqua is potentially going to be acquired, potentially. As you've seen a couple of the other ones get acquired, but they go out and make an acquisition in the CSPM space. Now, most of our listeners will be, they probably knew Evident.io, Redlock, Cloud Needy, which was doing this, which does this on the Azure and AWS side, right? CloudSploit I hadn't even heard of before, so definitely a newer entrant into the market. There's definitely a few others kind of under the covers out there that are in startup mode. But it's interesting because now it gives Aqua the ability to do some container security, but also the cloud configuration side as well on the runtime side. It allows them to have a little more focus. It's a little, my only concern here is it's a little outside of their potential market buyer, because what if they're deploying containers on-prem? Nobody cares about the cloud piece. Maybe, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how the buyer personas come together with this acquisition and how it continues to fuel growth.
Yeah, but you may have containers on-prem and some in the cloud and some in serverless, so yeah.
True. Don't get me wrong. We're going to see the containers deployed everywhere. It's just this is more cloud-focused and logging into the cloud environment, monitoring the runtime configuration. We've seen a lot of other solutions in this space as well, but it just, how does it fit into the rest of the Aqua portfolio is the interesting part, which is why I didn't see it coming.
Right. This last one's interesting. Stellar Cyber adds a new data streaming application to its Starlight platform. They claim to be the first open XDR security application platform, slashing the cost of a SIEM by reducing and optimizing the data fed to it, ensuring only high-fidelity, actionable events reach the SIEM instead of oceans of data. Interesting little niche.
It is. I mean, but there are other companies kind of doing this, so I'm
sure,
curious.
Not
how
alone in the niche, but
right, it's not alone. I mean, look, you can't. If you're a Splunk customer, you're not going to consume every piece of data because it gets really, really expensive. So a lot of vendors have been looking at ways to stream down what data gets integrated into the SIEM
and created multiple markets, right?
Yeah,
they've got folks, like Gravwell, that are like, forget that. We'll do SIEM better, right? Which is awesome. I mean, Cordy and company do a great job. Lots of other companies like that. Simplify is taking a different spin, right, with the operational focus.
Logarithms gone to an unlimited model to say it doesn't matter.
Right.
We're going to give you unlimited storage. Go for it.
With a much more full-featured platform that includes endpoint and network and all that stuff, and their own SIEM, right? And now you've got Stellar Cyber that's basically like, well, just funnel stuff through us. We'll help you sort through it so that you can have a better day in your SIEM without dealing with all this. They're basically doing some of the normalization that I feel like your SIEM should be doing and not charging you an arm and a leg for.
Yeah, I think that's what they're doing, right? And we saw other solutions similar to this. ProtectWise was doing aspects of this. In what they were doing, you now have the endgame Elastic acquisition and Elastic really making a footprint in the space and changing the way they do pricing in the industry on the SIEM and the endpoint side. So again, you're going to see a lot of continuations of this type of technology of people trying to streamline what they send to the SIEM or come up with different pricing models so it doesn't get so cost prohibitive to bring some of this data in and do it in the SIEM.
Right. It's amazing how the SIEM market has evolved, Matt, over the years, even since you and I were talking about it while we were at Tenable, is that for a long time, everyone was trying to get away from that one big SIEM, right? We all realized that was a bad idea. People still did it. And, if they wanted to put the resources in it, sure. And then you had these smaller kind of SIEMs spouting about that, like maybe you have multiple of those, or maybe that just replaces your SIEM, or maybe that lets you back off your SIEM. So now there's all these different strategies in the SIEM market, which makes it really interesting and fun to cover, actually.
Yeah, and we're also seeing some interesting consolidation. We've seen the SIEMs buying SOAR platforms to help with some orchestration automation. We're seeing endpoints coming in. I was briefing for an interview we're going to do with the Endgame Elastic folks in a couple of weeks. Think about your enchanted quadrants, your IOC enchanted quadrants, right? What piece was missing out of the SIEMs, right? They already had the log data. They were pulling in the network stuff and the threat intelligence. They were missing the endpoint data. So lo and behold, you have somebody like Elastic buying an Endgame. Right. Now the enchanted quadrant, all four of those are all into a single solution, which streamlines how many vendors you need to buy. It streamlines how much data you need to integrate because it's being natively done by Elastic in this particular case. So there's going to be, I think, some continued consolidation. Logarithms already done aspects of this with their own SOAR capabilities, their own endpoint capabilities, again, consolidating functionality into a single platform. So I think you're going to see more of that just because it makes it easier for enterprises to not have to worry about doing all these custom API integrations on their own.
The final story is Grammatech, which is a name I've seen here and there in the news. They're a developer of software assurance tools and advanced cybersecurity solutions for the government. Looks like they have been acquired by 5 Points Capital, similar to Matomo Bravo, I'm assuming, right?
I would assume so. I didn't look them up, but probably similar PE or venture firm that is looking to consolidate some assets.
Yeah, private equity firm, yeah.
Yeah.
So that will round out the enterprise security news for today. Stay tuned. Interviews coming up next.